We had. Okay. Thank you so much, Masha, for the invitation and the great conversations we had preparing for this meeting. And I'm very excited to meet Meeting Point and to start this or to continue this conversation with Russian-speaking audience. I think we have very interesting meeting points exactly that we can explore. So today I would like to just introduce the Mizrahi Civic Collective. Maybe just to say a word about the name. So Mizrahi is just Jews that came from Arab and Muslim countries to Israel in the 1950s, 1960s onwards. Basically, Mizrahi means Oriental, and versus the West. This is was the exact meaning of that reference to those Jews that came from not very far away to the land of Israel at the time, in Palestine at the time, historical Palestine at the time. I mean, they came from either here, exactly, from the land and from the surrounding countries. But they were still called the Orientals because Israel was considered to be a Western state. And so it had the weight of derogative meaning that we reowned.
На этом слове ориенталистский, который сейчас уже даже не используют, к него были определенные отрицательные коннотации.
Use that name to gain power, civic power. And so that is a struggle that comes from oppression, basically cultural oppression, ethnic oppression, socioeconomic oppression, that came along with that mindset of discrimination of the early founders of the State of Israel and the Zionist movement. So that's about Mizrahim. And about civic, it's because we wanted to clarify that we're a political movement and that we're talking about the Mizrahi experience in the Israeli context as a contributor to our perspective about citizenship and about our role in the society where we grew up. And so we're talking about empowerment of our civic power that comes from the margins and marginalized groups, both from a national perspective and of course Palestinians, and from a socioeconomic perspective, those who live in the Israeli periphery, both geographical and social, and of course gender perspective that looks exactly to those areas, those parts of the society where which are not considered the mainstream or are not considered the right person to be or the right Israeli to be. So that's about civic in very short. And about collective, it's because we do believe in collective power, and because we took upon ourselves to gain that power by demanding demanding it upon struggle and form a collective that would be meaningful in Israeli politics. And so that's basically about the name. I would like to say a bit about the long history of Mizrahi struggle that I mentioned for peace, equality, democracy. I'd like, and before I get to, why it's not recognized now, or it doesn't get its fair share in civil society in Israel, in terms of leading figures and in terms of leading discourses. I would like to say that the Mizrahi struggle is basically a historical struggle. It's a historical struggle that started in a specific context where the state of Israel was established and the Zionist movement came to historical Palestine, the land of Israel, to establish the state of the Jewish state. But it did that in a manner that was, had a colonial perspective in it. So it's very much a historical struggle. Racism was there just as part of, common European perspective. In that sense, Ashkenazi perspective here was the regular meeting point between the East and the West in that sense. But I want to mention, it's very important that today we still see those gaps and inequalities in access to education, in access to working places, and so I want to give you a little bit of data here. There is a recent census of the Israeli Bureau of Statistics that really recently says, no, actually Mizrahim make more, earn more live in terms of wages than Ashkenazim. And that's really the second generation, and that's really something that has not been still confirmed, in a sense that we need to really examine what's the basis of these findings. And we do know that it does not include property and wealth that families have. It only relates to income, and we do know that the major discrepancies in terms of a social economic status is about family wealth. So I want to mention it because it is something in terms of the facts that that we know that there has been mobility of Mizrahim in Israel, but we still know that the gaps exist. I want to just give you, this is a 2019 survey that was done, research, that was done by Inon Cohen and others, which basically says that we do see that Mizrahim in this third generation have more access to higher education than second generation, but we still see discrepancies of Mizrahim, for example, between the age of, the survey was between the age of 26 and 42 from those who participated in the survey. So Mizrahi men who accessed higher education, universities, was has risen from 27.4% in the second generation to 28% in the third generation. And Mizrahi women, 33%, rising up to the third generation, 43% of Mizrahi women. And when we do see that it's very low. And when you talk about Ashkenazi men, we see second generation 52.6% to third generation, which is 47%. So there is still a discrepancy. We see an increase in Mizrahi women access to higher education because many of them go to michlalot, which are like colleges, not universities. This is something that does not mean that they have equal access to the same jobs as Ashkenazi women, for example, because they study, but in academic institutions that are considered less value. We have also data that talks about, they talk a lot about mixed families in Israel, that, because people, marry each other, then the problem between mizrahim, like Jews that came from, Arab and Muslim countries, and Jews that came, will fade away. But we do see that there is a research based on the National Insurance Institute from 2022 that talks about only 15% of the young generation until the age of 43 are mixed, so only 15%. And there is another research in 2021 that talks about not a substantial increase in the mixed marriages in the third generation, from 9.7% in the second generation to 13.7% in the third generation. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of data on this, saying that we have the figures, but our perspective is taking our civic experiences and actually not getting stuck in biology or ethnic background. And we have a much larger and much universal message to the Israeli society and the Israeli regime in general. So I wanted to say that because the Mizrahi struggle has been really started in Wadi Salib and others before that. There were also struggles against the kidnapping of Yemenite and Mizrahi families, the kidnapping of babies, because they were considered, malfunctioning in terms of families, and they kidnapped them, and so there was thousands of babies that were and toddlers that actually disappeared. In welfare institutions and in hospitals and in nurseries. So there's been a struggle of these families right from the start, claiming racism and really, like, in that sense, crimes against humanity. I mean, that specific event. But there's also the Black Panthers in the Wadi Salib in the 1950s, struggle in Haifa, and also the struggle of the Black Panthers in Jerusalem in the 70s. But it has never been considered as a civic struggle for democracy. Everybody talks about today about the constitutional overhaul and how the protest from 2023 has managed, the democratic camp in Israel has managed to bring forward the importance of democracy, but the Mizrahi struggle was always considered to be a struggle on budgets and, equality. Like, the social struggle is something less of a democratic struggle than the struggle for the separation of powers and all these basic principles in democracy and the status of the Israeli judicial system, something that we've seen in the constitutional overhaul from 2023. There's also been a gap in representation of Mizrahi struggle in the peace camp, and so although there were Mizrahim already in the 1980s that met the PLO at the time when it was prohibited here to meet the PLO, the Mizrahim have reached out to Palestinian leadership and said, we come from Arab countries, we have joint culture, we have joint experiences in terms of discrimination and in terms of oppression, even though it's not the same and it's never equalized. But we, as Israeli Jews that came from Arab countries, we see the future of a Jewish life in that region, in the Middle East, as something that would have to change the path of history, and we don't want to be part of the oppressive regime here. But it's never something that was celebrated by the Israeli peace camp. It was basically I think the fault of the Israeli Ashkenazi peace camp that belittled that struggle and as something important to calls for peace. And I talk about a lot about the day-to-day peace, the fact that many Mizrahim has actually been living in mixed, and still today in mixed cities of Jews and Arab cities. You still, like in Lid and like in Akko, I mean, you have, and of course Jaffa and Tel Aviv, you have Mizrahim that live in these buffer zones, and they live with Palestinians. The question is, to what extent it was named and framed as an example for something that could be political. And I think it was undermined by the Israeli peace camp, who only considered peace to be the peace of the wealthy and the peace of the white and the peace of the Ashkenazi, kind of like a process that the Ashkenazi founders of Israel have understood, that they have to reach their hands to Palestinians, and therefore the way they have led to the establishment of the state of Israel, they should lead the process to peace. And I think that's where the Mizrahi struggle comes. And I want to move forward, fast forward. There was also the Mizrahi Democratic Rainbow that was established in the 1990s. When we thought that Oslo Agreement would bring us to peace, there was a window of opportunity to look into intra-Jewish relations and talk about the colonialism and the oppression between between different Jewish societies here. And so that was the establishment of the Mizrahi Democratic Rainbow, who talked about mainly distributive justice. I mean, distributive justice means we have to mix it all up and understand that the distribution of wealth, particularly when you talk about land, is something that is generating inequality generation after generation, and that inequality continues and feeds into economic rifts and conflicts, and inequalities just rottens the basics of society, especially when it's based on national identity, ethnic affiliation, ethnic identity, gender, etc. So maybe I just want to say, add one more thing about Russian speaking Aliyah, first Aliyah. I think what we have seen here is a place where the Mizrahi struggle actually was in parallel and in some senses also oppressive towards Russian speaking, the old Aliyah here, because they were brought in the 1990s. Basically, that's what I'm talking about. They were brought into Israeli periphery, which was mainly Mizrahim. And so this absorption process where the previous Aliyah is, I called it like identity cannibalism. I think that the fact that the old Aliyah tries to negate itself from the new Aliyah is something that is inherent into the formation of the Israeli society. Layer after layer, waves of Aliyah comes here, and they create enmity, and they create inequality, and they and each society and each aliyah has to distinguish itself, and I think the Mizrahim have distinguished themselves in a sense that on the one hand they see white aliyah coming in, the Russian speaking aliyah, but on the other hand and so they have a better chance of quicker social mobilization in that sense, but on the other hand they suffer from racism of Mizrahim, saying you're not Jewish, and therefore you are excluded from our society. And so I think this is something that needs to be still, let's say, we need to engage in that, and we need to unwrap it, and we need to look, as Mizrahim, we need to look at our own racism also towards Ethiopian Jews. I think we have a lot of repentance to do in that sense still. I mean, the point is, our Mizrahi perspective is not that we would oppress others, is that we actually look at what we've done, look at what was done to us, but not do it to others. And therefore, we think this needs to be a regime change that that negates that and cancels that that inherent race towards superiority, whether it's cultural, whether it's Jewish, whether it's ethnic, whether it's national. So the Mizrahi Civic Collective.
Show us the slides because we're still on the first slide.
19, yeah.
Oh, sorry. That was an introduction.
So 2018, we actually gathered together a group of Mizrahi activists at the time, and also including Ashkenazi activists that knew Mizrahi history and was important for them to support that voice against the nation state law. So the nation state law, has done one thing very important from a Mizrahi perspective. It wanted to enlarge the enmity between Israeli Jews and Palestinians, between Jews and Arabs, by negating the Arabness in Jewish history. So we do know that Jewish history is large enough to encompass, global affiliations with different ethnicities and with different cultural experiences and social experiences. So the fact that it was narrowed down basically in Article 4 of the nation state law to let's undermine and downgrade the status of the Arabic language from a formal language to what they called in the law a special language. So a special language is not a category that is known from a comparative perspective to other countries. So there's no status as being special. Either you're formal language or not. And the fact that Arabic was a formal language, just as English and Hebrew during the British Mandate. But then when the State of Israel was established, they canceled the formal language. English is a formal language. But they kept Arabic and Hebrew as two formal languages. Now, in fact, we do know that the status of the Arabic language, just as the status of its holders and its speakers, was not equal to the status of Hebrew speakers here. It was still, on paper, a formal language. So it was very, very difficult to see that constitutional act, nation state law, is a basic law, and Israel doesn't have constitution. It has different basic laws that together form the Israeli constitution. So that law was supposed to balance the human dignity and rights, basic law, and complement it and balance it, because that basic law was considered to be standing on the democratic leg of Israel. And so based on the formulation of previous Chief Justice Aaron Barak, that Israel is both democratic and Jewish, you had two legs, and then you have to balance it, because there was no bill that talked about the status of Israel as a Jewish state. So that nation state law was supposed to articulate what does it mean for Israel to be a nation state for the Jewish people globally. And what was very important for them is to downgrade the Arabic language from cancel it from being a special language. So we entered, and we, a group of people said, not in our name. Arabic is a Jewish language. It's not a Palestinian language only. It's a Jewish language. And Arabness is part of our identity as a Jewish people in general, all Jewish people, wherever, Ashkenazim as well. And there are experiences of Jews that came here from Arab countries that that undermined both their Arab dialects from Yemen, from Iraq, from Morocco, from the Maghreb, from Tunisia, from other countries, from Egypt. But it doesn't remain in that. I mean, we want to be in solidarity with Palestinians. So we know you target Palestinians, but you also target the Arabic component of Jewish history and Jewish identity. That was one thing. The second thing we objected to was the superiority that was the preference that was given to Jewish settlement, comparable to just a right of adequate housing. That's a common human rights in international human rights law. So we said, no, we want to clarify that we have suffered from the social engineering of distribution of population in the early 50s and 60s, where Jews from Muslim countries and Arab countries were distributed in the Israeli periphery to serve as protective shield from human protection from Palestinians trying to come back after 48. And what was very important for us to say, no more to social engineering and geographical and demographical engineering. So based on our experiences. That was in 2018. We filed it in 2019. And then, of course, in 2019, no, sorry, I don't think it was that. I think 2021, but I don't remember exactly, the judgment in all the different petitions that were filed from different perspectives about the violation of basic rights, clearly of Palestinians, but we said also for Jews that came from, for the Jewish people in general, because of the experience of Jews that came from Arab countries, Muslim countries, they were all rejected. So the judgment has ended that phase. But we were already gathered as a group, and so the constitutional overall came to be. We set up, as we were set up as a collective. We named ourselves the Mizrahi Civic Collective, and we had two visions: one, the democratic vision, and then after the 7th of October, the vision of hope. So basically, tell me if you can see it. Yeah. So this is our website, and we have here.
Netta, we can't see it. We can't see it. We are seeing a presentation, and we are still on the first slide of the presentation.
Ah, really? The first slide. Okay, so maybe I can.
Maybe you can stop sharing screen and then start again.
I will do that. Helps. Yeah, I will do that. Sorry, it just takes time. But so you're on the first slide, right? Okay, first slide, yeah. Sorry, I have to stop share. Takes time. Okay, you see me now?
Yes.
Okay. So maybe I would just say that I'll continue maybe without the presentation, because if it doesn't move forward. I want to say that we have a democratic vision, and then we made some changes after the 7th of October. Basically, our major messages in our vision was that we see Mizrahiness as a political stand. Just as being queer is a political stand, then you don't have to come ethnically from, a Mizrahi background to understand that in Israeli politics and the formation of the state of Israel, the negation of that Arab component was so dramatic and so substantial that we need to see it as the core problem of the Israeli regime. And so in that sense, inherent racism here has formed what came and what brought us today to a situation where we're on the verge of, I mean, we're already in fascist a period, I think, in Israel. And being an Arab is just, is not something that is considered even, I think, human today for many Israelis. When you really push them to look at the policies, they would not acknowledge it, but some would. More and more people would have. Clearly, the heads of government, and this is something that we see very clearly is happening. So I think what we propose is to look at that specific history of racism is something that we all need to adopt if you want to, take a critical perspective to what's going on and to really make a change. We also talk about the place in the middle. We call it an in between Jewishness and Arabness, and I think that specific positioning of Mizrahim is something that is helpful in understanding that we object to, an essentialized perspective on what is Jewishness, okay? Because the history and the sociology of the different Jewish groups throughout history is something that has always been an integration, point and between the Jewish, let's say the core Jewish identity that is inherent in the Bible, in the Holy Scripts, etc., and the world around us. That's why we have different dialects, and that's why we have different social experiences. That's why we have different colors, and that's why we have that plurality is something that we should cherish. Okay, we should cherish. And if we look at that perspective, we can understand why I call it the rescue. I coined this term mutual rescue. So the rescue of Ashkenazim or of Mizrahim is dependent on the rescue of Ashkenazim, because in that sense, Ashkenazim today is really, equals to a curse even in the Israeli society today. When you say to somebody, you're Ashkenazi, okay? It's a derogative term because it carries with it all the notion of being, superior and racist towards Mizrahim. And so the very essence of being Ashkenazi, and Ashkenaz, and understanding where is Ashkenaz, where was Ashkenaz, and the gap between the historical continuation, the historical experiences, and the sociological understanding of what is Ashkenazi here. The gap is so huge that there's no place for European Jews to bring forward what, their culture and their history and their experiences without being, connected or having this connotation of being part of the oppressive part of the Jewish people. And therefore I talk about mutual rescue, because we can never talk only about Mizrahim, something that is going on all the time. We talk about Mizrahim and what they would, how they would vote in the elections, and what would the Israeli Mizrahi periphery would vote. Would it go with, Bibi again and not Bibi here? It's always about Mizrahim, but it's never about Ashkenazim. So I think we want to rescue Ashkenazim from Ashkenaziness as Ashkenaziut, as it was formed here in the Israeli context. And so it's basically something that we can take forward to kibbutzim and development towns. If we want to rescue development towns, we would have to, look at kibbutzim, and if kibbutzim would want to this land, and if we're having all these resources that are just incomparable to what people in public housing, do not have in these development towns in the Israeli periphery, then we have to look at how to change the rules of the game, and basically it boils down to equality. It boils down to changing that structures today that people, would not consider themselves as racist, but they would just enjoy all the benefits of, coming from that family and living in that specific town. And I think changing the structures of inequality also fits into mutual rescue of the two peoples, the Palestinian and Jewish people. When you think about the way that the state of Israel has actually narrowed down who is Jewish, okay? And narrowed down to how does an Israeli Jewish, person should look like and act like. And of course, it should never be looked at and look alike like Palestinian, and not in language and not in culture. And I think we can never really rescue kibbutzim, or that live in the Israeli periphery, in the boundaries of Israel, the undefined boundaries of Israel, the de facto boundaries of Israel, if we don't talk about what's happening on the other side of the border. So we don't talk about what's going on in Gaza. So that's in the Gaza buffer area cannot really fulfill itself in its aspiration to live in peace and to live in dignity, without Palestinians in Gaza after the genocide live in peace and live in dignity and live and start, which should just start by allowing them, or making sure that they would live. And so I talk about mutual rescue a lot. And I think this is something that the Mizrahi Civic Collective is really, that is one of the slogans that we adopted after the 7th of October. And it sits on the primary slogan that we came with. Our statement was no to the old order and not to the new order, meaning we don't want to go back to the pre-constitutional, coup or overhaul. We don't want to go back. We want to change the rules of the game. We want to make the Israeli public understand important for them to make lives of Jews in the Middle East or here in the region better, and therefore, of course, it projects to the safety of Jews throughout, wherever. We want to make them understand that they have to adopt this political imagination that the life of Jews cannot be rescued if the life of Palestinians will not be rescued. And therefore, we have to work to rescue Palestinian life, because there cannot be genocide for one people without the other people, suffering from the consequences. And I think we have to understand that the Jewish people is a national minority worldwide. And for me, it's a key goal to save the Jewish people from its own mistakes and from its own actions. And I think we have to recognize the limitations of power and the limitations of the use of force, and understand that the state of Israel has established itself as a state that is only talking about self-rescue, self-defense, self-determination, and all of that, all of that it boils down to a lack of understanding that the Jewish people has lived throughout the ages, because it always tried to coexist with its surroundings. And I think that we have taken the experience of the Holocaust too many steps forward in establishing and jungle, a villa in the jungle, as it was named. Israel was named, by Ehud Barak, a villa in the jungle. And therefore marking the Middle East and Arab society in general as a jungle. But we came from that jungle, The Jewish people has lived and has great history in that supposedly jungle. And especially the Palestinian people that, are a mirror of our liberation. And I think we need to understand that our liberation can never be, even national liberation, cannot take place at the expense of the elimination of the other people that live here.
Netta, can we, I don't know, are you wrapping up? I wanted to make sure that we have time for questions.
Yeah, I just want to say a word about the Mizrahi Civic Collective. Our main goal is actually to establish activist communities throughout the countries that establish power from the margins. So what we want to look at is organizing, community organizing in these margins, and we want to be part of it. We want to encourage it. We want to encourage student caucuses. We want to establish neighborhood committees and local collectives that would do that, would be the spiral in the web that would look at these populations and believe in them, in these marginalized populations. We don't want to go by the Israeli division between right and left. We don't want to go by the Israeli divisions of who's Jewish, who's not Jewish. We think we need to join forces together, marginalized groups. I would like to say it's very difficult work because marginalized populations are exactly the ones that suffer most in war times, both economically, socially. They're the ones who have been abandoned. So the challenge is very high, but I think we cannot bypass it because that's what many Israeli activists and organizations, the movement have been doing all these years. And I think we are positioned in a very a good point in time to continue saying that and try to organize power around it together with the Palestinian forces and other forces. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It was such a powerful speech. And I would invite everyone just to raise hands and ask the questions in any language. Я повторю то же самое по-русски. Вы можете поднимать руки и задавать вопросы, включать камеру субтитры на любом языке, который вам удобен.
Turn on your camera in any language that you're comfortable with.
Nina?
Hi, Netta. Can you hear me? Thank you very much for the speech. It was a very new perspective for me. And my question is, what is your vision of the Israeli state when the Ashkenazi Mizrahi problem that you told about is how do you see it? And are there any specific characteristics, material characteristics, maybe metrics that will show us that we have already reached this place?
Yeah. I think when you talk about how it would materialize, I think we would start seeing cooperation between the cities. First of all, between mixed cities, I think we would see more cooperation between Palestinians and Mizrahim and Ashkenazim that want to break the division between what's a poor neighborhood and children that live in poor families that go to that underappreciated school or the school that have less resources. I think we would see more joint struggles. I think we would see more divisions, divisions of property resources. I think we would see more joint schools. I think we would see a situation where cities would actually enact their own laws that would negate national laws. So what I see is local struggle that would, push from bottom up. I don't think that we can in any way see a change that comes from, above, unless it is forced by the international community. And I think any political imagination cannot rely on international force to make that redistribution of powers. I think redistribution of powers by international community would only look at the division between 67 and 48. And I think we have to go beyond that. I think if we would have a very strong 48 Jewish state and a poor 67 Palestinian state, we would still have these problems of racism. I think we have to look into affirmative action more seriously. I think we should have, today we are in this horrible Kahanistic fascist era where affirmative action is really, is considered to be a really horrible policy, a policy that should be overthrown. I think we need to look at the national institutions that hold a lot of land resources. So the World Zionist Organization and Kakal and other. So we have all these institutions that hold a lot of power here that is generating inequality. And I think we need to absorb those institutions. So there should be both a movement from bottom up. So I think we should see more cooperation between now considered to be rival societies. We have, for example, Dimona and we have Ras Jaba. So these are both in the Israeli periphery. Dimona is a lot, considered to be a mizrahi city. And then we would have the Bedouin unrecognized village that is supposed to be, completely eliminated. I would see cooperation to form joint, councils, local councils. And so it's the same for the northern Negev and the southern Masafariata, so the southern Hebron Hills. We would see more cooperation here. What we see today is the religious Zionist Garainim caucuses that have been distributed both in mixed cities and in development towns to just, enlarge that gap and that rivalry and enmity between Jews and Palestinians. And I think the future for Mizrahim and Ashkenazim would be better if Palestinians would come into the equations. I think they're the ones that exemplify the problem of inequality. And I think Mizrahim would enjoy very much. Mizrahim and other people who live in these marginalized cities and population, I think they would benefit a lot from the fact that the Palestinian struggle for equality would win over. So I think we would have to that's how I see it, playing around. There should be institutional changes. There should be bottom-up struggle, joint struggle. And so, and definitely I understand that the first phase is really two-state solution, but I don't see problems of inequality being solved and not continuing to feed up the conflict if they're not being, tackled head on. I think that's something we bring into the floor.
Thank you very much for the answer.
Any more questions? Dmitry, Борис, Аркадий. Вы можете пока еще подумать, у меня тоже есть вопрос. I also have a question while other people think. I know that you work with house demolitions and you fight against house demolitions. What do you find efficient? What helps you? How, like, do you actually manage to prevent it from happening?
Yeah. So my other hat is not the director of the Mizrahi Civic Collective, but I'm also a human rights lawyer working for Palestinian rights for many years. Basically, what I do is I help with the legal tools that I have. I help them, exercise sumud. So I help them exercise their right to exist in their places. So I am very modest in proposing anything, or suggesting that legal work saves populations and their existence and against house demolition and evictions. I first and foremost believe that it is about reinforcing the populations that live there so that's the first thing. I think that many Palestinian communities have been abandoned politically. And I think the fact that they've been abandoned, meaning that they have less resources today to exercise their sumud, they know best how to exercise their sumud in terms of grazing and in terms of using the land resources that they have and cultivating the lands, and have all these mitigating measures that they adopt. From a legal perspective, what I've been doing is basically, bringing their voices forward to the judiciary. So whatever decision that is made based on the understanding that there are historical villages here. And also I've been seeing the state of Israel, the occupying power, objecting to the with aerial photos, people that have been living, for example, in Masafayata in caves. That has been denied by the Israeli judiciary and by the state of Israel. But these people still live in their caves, and they will not leave, even though there are rulings today that say that they have never lived there, or they just, came from, in the past few years, and they trespass and whatever. So I think what is the first thing that needs to be done today is bring these communities the resources to continue doing what they do, and not tell them what to do, and not try to, play with that. If they have safety problems today because they need to have flashlights to understand, or cameras to take photos of those pogromists that attack them, then that's what we need to give them. And I think from an advocacy perspective, we just need to hammer on the fact that they are historical communities, that they have their national identity, cultural identity, diverse identity within the Palestinian society, that is just different expression of Palestinian life, and that it is rich, it is there, it's continuous, and I think that there is work that is being done today, and I always believe that legal work should never stop. Even though the regime is an oppressive regime, legal work should not stop. So we should continue doing that, just as lawyers under apartheid, South African apartheid, continued to work then we should continue to work. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Дмитрий, Регина, Нина, Аркадий. Кто-нибудь из вас хочет задать вопрос? I have the second one though. Воспользуюсь площадкой. So I was wondering whether, I don't really know what country you're coming from and whether you have any family left there. And if you are in touch with them, if you can go visit them, how does it feel? Is it safe? Like, how does your family life work or friends?
Yeah. So, Jews that came from diplomatic ties with North Africa, I think that's the most flourishing Jewish communities that remain there, and I envy them. We don't have in Yemen Jewish population anymore, and so no, what I can do is just look at the history and cherish oral culture. A lot of it is connected to the Jewish religion and the different practices of Jewish religion. And so I'm not religious, but I still, like all these poems and the culture and the music and the language. Actually, my Arabic is Palestinian Arabic. It's not a Yemenite Arabic. Not a Yemenite Arabic. And something that I'm sad about, but I'm very happy that I have Palestinian Arabic because this is actually where I live. This is the context that I live. So there was in Oslo, right after the Oslo Agreement, there was a group of Yemeni rabbis that were permitted by the Yemeni authorities to go back and to have a visit. But that was it. Yeah, and there's also, I have to say, in Dubai and whatever, there's like now a little bit of flourishing of I don't know, some Yemeni community or some practices of bar mitzvah and stuff. But it's really something that I think if we would be able to have open borders, is something that we would see a whole new world coming to us. And so yeah, but that's only a dream now. I think we would have to pay a lot of prices for the genocide that we've done to Palestinians before we can see any imagination of something of open borders, unlike what we have been hearing with the Abraham Accords and all this promise. I don't think we can bypass what we did. I think we would we would have to go through this very, very harsh path of repentance and transitional justice before we can look at these communities. I have to say, in that sense, there are different communities of mizrahim, of Jews from Arab countries and Muslim countries across the world, and I think we should cherish that, whatever we do have, because many of us here in Israel, had to become Israelites, and so once you do that, you forget your language, and or you are made to forget your language and your history.
Totally. Thank you for sharing. Что-нибудь еще или закругляемся? Okay, seems like
You could just say, yeah, but maybe I could just say, I would love you to come and speak to us and to the Mizrahi Civic Collective and hear your perspective. So thank you for this opportunity, but you're also invited.
Thank you. It's really nice. Very rare in Israel that anyone wants to listen to us. Thank you, I appreciate it. Я скинула в чат ссылки на организацию мизрахийских коллектив, на
I've
нас
sent to the chat a link to Netta's
и
organization,
вторая
to
ссылка
the
добавляет там
Mizrahi Civil
как
Collective.
В любом случае, спасибо за то, что были с нами,
Anyway, thank
и
you
за
for
то,
being with
что
us,
вы
and
нашли...
thank
Ой,
you for
Регина, я сейчас
finding
я скажу
time.
по-английски, ты перейдешь на русский. Okay, I'll say it in English. Thank you so much to all of you for finding time, for dedicating your evening to listen to challenging experiences, and for finding space in your heart and in your mind to get to know each other and listen to someone else's perspective that might be new or might be surprising in different ways. So thank you all for that, and we hope to see you again, and we will definitely be in touch. And thank you, Netta, for sharing.
Thank you. Thank you, Netta and Marcia.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Masha. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Take care.